I am very passionate about working directly for people with disabilities. So I'd like to talk about the history of people with developmental disabilities, creating meaningful lives in our work in supporting people. So I would like to start with this picture, which is me as a little girl with my great aunt Alice and my great Nana Tony. And this picture represents that disability is a natural part of our human race. My Aunt Alice lived at Worcester State Hospital for 30 years, and my Nana Tony was an immigrant from Sweden, and she came over with my great-grandfather and settled in Massachusetts, had 6 children, started having issues. The doctor said, don't have any more children. She went on to have 8 more, and she had absolutely had a breakdown. So that was my first exposure to people with disabilities. When I was in high school in 1977, I was involved with a church youth group, and one of our activities was to volunteer for the Special Olympics. And as an extra bonus, we got to go to Laconia State School to see where those people lived. So I went up and we saw these large day programs where many people were sitting doing nothing. And I was like, why is this? Where are these people coming from? In 1984, when I was going to UNH to get a psychology degree, I answered an ad in the paper for a residential counselor position at a group home. And it was my first job working for people with disabilities. And I really didn't understand who they were, why they did what they did. I wasn't going to stay in the field for very long because it was all rehabilitation. It was help people learn how to use utensils to eat, help people use the bathroom appropriately, help people learn how to cook. And here I am 22 years old and I have no clue how to even take care of myself at the time. So I was working for people and I wasn't going to do it past graduating college. But a new executive director came into our organization and he said, instead of focusing on aid to daily living skills, ADL skills constantly, they're important, but that's not what brings meaningful life into view. People with disabilities want to love, be loved, and belong in their communities. And they have been terribly brutalized most of their lives just because they have a label of a disability. So let's change that. And I said, that's what I want to do. This is a civil rights movement. This is helping people get their humanity seen. I want to say that I've been a direct support worker for 30 years. I was a terrible one for the first 2. Because I had no idea. For the last 28, I think I'm a pretty good direct support professional because I've learned, I've been educated, and the people that I serve have actually been the greatest teachers I've ever had. The education that I got, and I think most DSPs really need a good education, that were often put into work without understanding where people have come from. Institutions. So even though I had been at Laconia, these were the first 5 people to be deinstitutionalized from New Hampshire State Hospital and Laconia after a lifetime of living there. So survival skills were paramount in people's lives, and here we are trying to teach them things without understanding where they've come from. Dr. Wolframsberger expanded the concept of normalization and wrote about social role valorization, and I'll explain that more. Valued social roles lead to the good things in life, such as having the valued social roles of husband, wife, father, mother, daughter, son, employee. The roles that we hold in our lives bring us the good things in life. And people with disabilities are usually given very negative role assignments. And I'll go into that in just a second. But Dr. Wolfensberger's work helped us understand our unconscious thinking and brings it to conscious thinking and critical thinking, so that when we're supporting somebody, we're really elevating our awareness of how they're being seen in the world. So, to start that out, I'd like to just quickly ask or explain to people what our society values today. Would we agree that wealth is something that our society values? Health and beauty? You got to be young and beautiful. The cosmetic industry is multi-billion dollars. Youth and newness. Pepsi, sometimes those little 5 words or less to brand something. Pepsi, be young, have fun, drink Pepsi, right? So the marketing machine is pounding heavily upon us all the time, every day. You put TV. Independence, fierce independence. You know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do things yourself. Productivity, see how much you can crank out. And a pleasurable life free from suffering. Everybody should be comfortable. Convenience is very important. Drive through, everything in our society. So, what is the opposite of wealth? Poverty. What is the opposite of health and beauty? Health. And beauty, unattractive. Youth, newness, worn out. Independence, productivity, or slower maybe, and a pleasurable life free from suffering. What's the opposite of that? Pain, difficult getting through the day, depression. All right. So once we understand that, this is what the people we're serving are up against. If this is what we value, and this is what we might devalue, by default, the people we serve are cast into devalued roles. They're automatically set up for big opposition, right? And by default, us workers are also set up into that devalued role. It makes it difficult because we're in alignment with people. So we're trudging up an uphill battle every day. And it's because we're going against what is valued in society. When I just learned that, I went, oh my gosh, that explains so much. Wow. So people around the world are looking at this concept of how to support people with developmental disabilities to get their humanity seen. And so this is what we're up against. So Dr. Wolfensberger's work really looked at how people with disabilities are cast into negative role assignments. How many here have been told they're really special for working with people like that, or they're a saint for working with people like that, all right? You get 100% of the hands raised, because they're right. Well, actually, if you asked my family, they would tell you I am no saint. And it's actually this backhanded compliment where it's really putting down the people we serve. It's good that you work with them because I couldn't. So they're casting all people with disabilities into this big category. And so they're saying, I'll give to you. The Jerry Lewis telethon is a big one. I'll write a check, but I don't want to get to know anybody. And Jerry Lewis telethon really plays upon people's disabilities so that you'll feel bad and make that check. But do you want to get to know people that you really feel like so terrible about? And often families who have a child just born with some kind of disability, the room is very somber. That is a parent's first reaction. I'm sorry you have a child. It's not like, oh, congratulations, you have a baby. You've been waiting for this baby. It's like, oh, I'm very sorry. And other charities, the Knights of Columbus, and these are all good people, all well-intentioned people. The Knights of Columbus, you know, object of pity, charity, help the mentally handicapped citizens. They have since changed those promote good lives for people with disabilities. I mean, I've seen this change, but this is recent here in Dover. But this is a way that that role assignment of object of pity or charity is assigned to people with disabilities. Burden. The role assignment of being a burden to society, especially during hard economic times. I am from Rochester, and so I get the Rochester Times, and I read the editorial section. And in 2009, we can find evidence of this negative role assignments assigned to people with disabilities all over the place. So here is an editorial statement from a school board member that's talking about children in special ed really dragging down the whole city's budget, okay? So this is what it says. I see so many children at the elementary school level that are already bored with school because they are constantly waiting for those that cannot do the work to catch up and finish. Then combine that with the constant disruption by the special needs children, and you do not have an environment suitable for learning. I'm sorry for those families with special needs children, but maybe it's time they are in a class that suits their needs. My family has special needs children that were classified by the states and courts as special needs, so I do have sympathy, but they receive their education from appropriate teaching institutions that address their specific needs. As a school department, you are dumbing down our children and providing a grave disservice to them. Those kids need to go someplace else. That's how the institution started. And then the institution started to become snake pits and just terrible prison for people because they weren't up to par in their learning style. Now today that wouldn't happen. Everybody has a different learning style, and visual learners, auditory learners, tactile learners, how do you learn? And we figure out how kids can learn. And if you're not in the classroom and you're outside the classroom, so imagine having a special classroom with all kids with autism, what are you going to learn? To have more autism instead of to learn how to behave. What's the social norm? If you're out of the social norm, how are you going to learn the social norm? The eternal child. Have people heard this phrase? Jack is a 40-year-old man with a 5-year-old mentality. Have you heard that? He's got a developmental age of 4 or 5. Well, that actually isn't true either. If you've lived 42 years, you have 42 years of life experience that nobody can take away from you, right? And developmentally, it's what you can and cannot do, but it doesn't say what you can continue to learn to do, right? So I have a friend who has significant cerebral palsy, and she said if you read her file, she cannot tie her shoes, she cannot go to the bathroom independently, she cannot dress herself, she cannot roll over. So she would measure as a 6-month-old developmentally. She is 53, a college graduate, she was married, she owns her own home, she's a teacher. So we've got to take that off the table as well, that whole comparison. When a person is put into this eternal child role, you are actually taking away their voice. And you're creating the ceiling on them that they cannot poke through. They cannot grow. Low expectations for themselves. So we're trying to bring out the best in people and their chronological age. What are other 42-year-old people doing? And let's do more of that so that there can be this identification. The role of client. Client, consumer, or patient. We're all clients if you have a lawyer. We're all consumers if we're going grocery shopping. We might have been patients at one time. And when you're in those roles, there's expectations of you. You are going to be compliant. You're going to do exactly what the doctor said. You're going to lay in bed all the time and heal, and people are going to feed you and take care of you. The thing with client and consumer, if somebody with a disability that we serve is always in that role, they can't hire or fire you. They could by theory, but most likely they won't, right? We can fire, we have power. If you're stuck in that role constantly, we take away people's power. Do you see that? So client, consumer, patient, or in the sick role, we'll often hear people say, Kathy suffers from cerebral palsy, or she's wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair. The medical model surrounds people. And so they're in the passive role versus an active role in their own lives. So the hurtful consequences, if you're ever put into that position, is a feeling of rejection, constantly. You and I might feel rejection at times, but people with disabilities live with rejection almost every day. Kids with disabilities in schools are bullied quite a bit, so which leads to low self-esteem, a feeling of hopelessness. It doesn't matter if I try because I'm not going to get anywhere. Profound loneliness. People with disabilities are with their families or they're with paid people. Where's the friends? Where's somebody that just likes you for who you are? Very untrusting. Sometimes the revolving door of workers in and out of people's lives creates that I'm not going to get close to you because you're going to be gone. You're here for the paycheck. Unmotivated, withdrawn, and denied access to the good things in life. But the good news is, we can change these negative consequences or less than desirable outcomes by assisting people to move into valued social roles. We can all identify with valued social roles in relationships. So I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm an employee, I'm a teacher, I'm a direct support professional, I have work, hobbies, I'm a knitter, I love to be a crafter, a pet owner, camper, sport enthusiast. So those are the big roles. And within those roles are lots of activities to fill that role. As a mother, I have lots of activities like getting my kids up for school in the morning, getting them to and fro, preparing meals, getting them to do their chores. Right? So there's lots of activities, but the role of mother. And the role also is known to everyone, right? So it's a valued social role that others can identify in a positive way that has expectations attached to it. So as a presenter here today, you expect me to have some knowledge, you expect me to look somewhat presentable, right? So role expectancies. So let's talk about why social roles are important. So when I meet somebody for the first time, I might say, where are you from? And what do you do for work? And have you traveled? You know, you start asking these questions that gives that person a place. So I'm measuring up, where am I have things in common with you, so that I can maybe deepen a conversation a little bit further. So social roles gives person a place. Roles affect all aspects of our lives, right? As I said, at home, at work, out in the community. And the roles we possess powerfully impact opportunities for contribution, so that you're not just sitting there, but you're actually getting up and doing something in your community. You have material gain, so employment, you have money, your status and reputation, people, as we said, productivity, people like people who are employed, right? So you have a positive reputation for being a worker. Self-image, you feel good about what you do. That social role of being an employee. Acceptance and belonging, associations and relationships. Social valued roles also give me choice, autonomy. I have the freedom to move about, and personal growth and development. So I can keep learning And the more big the role and the more valued they are, the better chance for the benefit of the doubt. So the bigger the role, the better off you are. So we got to think about that for the people we serve. So here's some of my stories of how I have used this in my work. So the last 28 years. This is my friend Frank, my housemate, Frank, and he grew up here in Dover. He was born in 1937, and in the 1944, he went to school at St. Mary's. He repeated the first grade twice. The priest went up to his grandmother, who was raising him at the time, and said, "He's not learning. There's a place called Laconia State School where he belongs with all of those other people." So at 8.5 years old, can you imagine that happy little fella went up to this institution in 1945. So he lived there for 3.5 years, 11.5 years old. He contracted polio, and the superintendent of schools did not contact his grandmother. She heard it through the grapevine that Frank had polio, and she called him up and said, "I want him out of there now. I'm coming to pick him up." So she brought him back here to Dover. He never got the formal education, but he did work as a sweeper at Davidson Rubber. You know, that's when Claristat and the shoe shops were happening. Dishwashing. He lived in Boston for a little while, would take the train. I mean, so this was a very capable person. So he lived pretty successfully. But then around 19, 20, 21 years old, things started happening for him, and he would just disappear. He would end up in Florida, and he would call his family and says, "I'm in Florida. Can you help me get back home?" They would get a bus ticket to him. He would come back here, get cleaned up. He looked kind of wild, dirty, frantic. They would help him out. A few days later, he'd be gone again. Fully furnished apartments and jobs. Well, it turns out mental health issues were kicking in. So Frank, at the age of 37, disappeared out of his family's life. So for 17 years, they never heard from Frank. He was actually a person who lived on the streets across the country. Frank has schizophrenia and was in and out of institutions across our country. We do have documentation where they were asking for electric shock therapy for Frank and giving him permission. He had all his teeth pulled out without anesthesia, because back then they thought no brain, no pain, right? So as I was working with him and going to the dentist, he didn't want to go to the doctors or the dentist. I mean, it took a lot of trust on his part to convince the dentist, "Be gentle, please," because this is the experience. This is the common life experience of people with disabilities who had lived, especially in the institutions. Like a lot of people had their front teeth pulled out, you'll see, because they couldn't bite you. In 1989, his sister got a phone call from an institution in Portsmouth, Virginia. He was trying to hitchhike to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the trucker took him to Portsmouth, Virginia, and he landed in an institution down there. And after 6 months, he's like, "I'm from Dover, New Hampshire." And so his sister got the phone call. She was working at Wendy's at the time. So they brought him back up, and Frank came home, and I was working for an agency at the time, and they said, "You need to help this man named Frank. Find him an apartment, find him some staff." So it took me a long time to get into Frank's head, to get to know Frank. So I had staff going in and asking him a lot of questions. He had his head under the covers for 20 hours out of the day. I had staff trying to read to him, bring him home-cooked meals. They would all get tossed away. All we could do was get canned goods with a can opener. He just trusted that. He didn't trust us. To get him to the doctors was a big chore. To socialize was a big chore. In fact, he left the apartment one time. We went in and he was gone. And for 2 weeks, we looked for Frank everywhere, truck stops, under bridges, in cemeteries. I was looking for Frank for 2 weeks. We finally did find him under a bridge in Durham, and they said, "Frank, why did you leave?" And he said, "They all talk too much." You know, some people would rather have no services than services that are not listening to people, right? So that's when I said, all right, let's back up services, let's back up supports. I was looking for an apartment at the same time. I was going to look for him for a new apartment. I got him one upstairs, me downstairs with one of the monitors in case there was a fire. So sometimes you got to be creative about how you support people. And after 6 months, he started doing his laundry with me, or when he came down to my door and said, "You got any spaghetti?" I was like, oh my gosh, I think we made headway. So after a year, I was married, and my husband and I were buying our first house, and I said, "Frank, would you like me to find you a new neighbor, or would you like to come live with David and I?" And he says, "I'll come with you, honey." I had gotten into his heart. I had earned his trust, right? So that was 25 years ago. So the negative roles that Frank had before I met him was homeless, mentally sick, a menace to the community. A lot of people are rounded up and put into institutions or given a bus ticket, get out of our city, right? And an object of pity. And so he was lonely, a low self-esteem, very untrusting and withdrawn. He's very much a reclusive person. So today, he's one of my best teachers. Sometimes when we're sitting late at night, I'll say, "Frank, I gotta go get to bed because I gotta get my kids up in the morning for school." And he says, "You know, there's more ways to learn than going to school, you know." I said, "Well, that's true. That's true." A mentor, a brother, a friend, a regular at a restaurant. And now he smiles, laughs, jokes, he's more social, he's willing to give and take, and he's trusting of us. People with disabilities are here to teach us something. My role in Frank's life as a direct support worker is to get as many people involved in his life. As a brother, as a friend, as a regular at a restaurant. So Frank, he sleeps in full clothes with his shoes on, winter coat. He's not getting into pajamas. I have to know where he's at, where he's coming from, and be on his terms. As a direct support worker, I've written an article, how does a middle-class, white human service worker connect with a man who is homeless and has all these labels around him? Well, it's fate, it's the stars, it's me paying attention, it's me being educated about understanding his story. Holly used to be a service coordinator, and she used to come over to visit Frank once a month, and Frank would be under the covers in his room. Still to this day, he's under the covers 20 hours out of the day. On a good day, he's out, he's up, we're out and about doing things. But so she'd go over and say, "Hey Frank, I want to get to know who you are." And he wouldn't talk, wouldn't say anything, because we've had a lot of case managers over time. So she'd come back the next month and say, "Hi Frank, my name's Holly, I'm here to get to know you a little more." Nothing. Third time, he comes out of the covers, he goes, "I don't need a babysitter, you know." And he goes back under. She goes, No, that's not my intentions. I want to get to know who you are as a person." So when she left, he's like, "Where's that Holly?" And I said, "Ooh," he said her name. My job as a direct support worker is saying, there's a connection. I need to bring her in. She left after 9 months of working, but we invited her for dinner. We invited her to go out to Stratford Farm. We invited her in. That was 12 years ago. She's in his life. She became his co-guardian and made that connection. As a direct support worker, I'm like having to be bold. I'm having to ask people to join in on a relationship, because relationships, I think we can all agree, are our most precious gifts in life, right? Your best friends, your partners, your children, your family. That's important for him too. So if he was a loner and he was all by himself, and it can't be me to fulfill all that for him too. So my job as a direct support worker is to find people who will like Frank for Frank. And my measurement of my work as a direct support worker is how many people can I get around the table, the birthday table. So this is Frank's birthday and we're at Newick's, and I have 10 people I can call on at any time to be around Frank. And it's fantastic. As a direct support worker, he has made me walk the fire, you know, and be loyal and be thoughtful and be person-centered and be a welcomer and get lots of people involved. And to be on his terms, to think about what it is that he needs and wants, and how can I help him develop those roles or be seen in those roles so that others can identify with him too. It's the identification with others. So when I'm working with people with disabilities, I'm looking to help them present their best foot forward always. I care about him a lot. And I'm going to be an ambassador to everybody in this room, that everybody belongs. He has the right to be here. And he's a human, right? Bringing him out from the darkness into the light. The power of a direct support professional in a person's life is amazing. I mean, I really feel like we're on a social justice movement, a civil rights movement. People with developmental disabilities have been at the lowest rung on our ladder, and now it's time to raise them up and see their humanity, one for all and all for one, inclusion. So I hope people choose to do this work and find the right person, the right chemistry, the right, and you'll get all these ideas. So as a direct support worker, to go in to somebody's home or to know what their goals are, to think about it more broadly and to say, okay, I got to get to know you. The first thing as a direct support worker, you need to discover who this person is. And that takes some time. You know, you might read charts, you might read the individual service agreement, you might read the file, but sometimes that's people's biases, right? However somebody's written it that year. That's one way, but then to talk to other staff, to talk to the family, to talk to the person. What are you really interested in? What makes you wake up in the morning? You want to try something out new today, or what is your new regular routine? What is your norm? If somebody has a cooking goal, you might find a cooking class. So the role of a cook, you plan a menu. You go to the grocery store. You learn how to budget money. So all those activities come under the role of cooking, right? Or if somebody wants to learn how to knit, go find some other knitters. If you don't know how to knit, go find some other knitters and join a club or start a club. Or you got to be good askers, you know, find out what's going on. But we're looking to go a little bit beyond that model of taking care of. It's a really switching a mindset into supporting somebody's life versus taking care of somebody. But how can we support somebody to live a rich, meaningful life, full of relationships, full of reasons to get up in the morning, full of roles that they can fill. And it's really exciting. It's really exciting work. Kids transitioning now need employment. The unemployment rate is well over 60% for people with disabilities. They're being cheated. They need to work. They want to work. They want to contribute. So if you don't want to work, then you got to figure out how you're going to contribute to your community. You know, there's some elders, you know, that are shut-ins. They're all by themselves. I bet they could use somebody to have a good conversation with, somebody to do some errands, somebody to go out for a drive to the beach. Somebody with a developmental disability could be a real asset in somebody's life. So that's my stories about being a direct support professional. I love what I do. I would love good people to keep coming into the field and helping this civil rights movement keep moving in a positive way.
Living Innovations supports people with developmental disabilities to have a good life at home and in their communities. To learn more about a career as a DSP, please visit livinginnovations.com.